and welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and video show which brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, and experience from hundreds, no, thousands of successful individuals from around the world. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe so you won't miss a new episode. I'm your host, Frits Bussemaker, and today I'm honored to have a conversation with David Puttnam. David, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Rich. Very much indeed. Nice to see you.
And actually, I should be calling you Lord David Puttnam. We'll cover about that a little bit. For those people in the audience who do not know who you have a career of over 30 years in film, 25 years public service, 10 years in education. I don't know if that's in parallel or sequential, covered that as well. Currently the chair of Atticus Education. You were a member of the House of Lords until 21.
Yep.
And at that time, you were chair of the Democracy and Digital Technologies Committee, hopefully something which is something we can discuss. It's very topical at the moment. And your film career, that's probably what most people will recognize. Your films include The Mission, Killing Fields, Chariots of Fire, Midnight Express, Memphis Belle, which have won over 10 Oscars, 31 BAFTAs, 13 Golden Globes, 9 Emmys, and more prizes. So lots of recognition there. So, David, obviously you are aware of your own background. When I was preparing this interview from my side, I found it quite interesting that you, first of all, you obtained an honorary degree of the Exeter University.
Yep.
And why was that?
I think there's different ideas as to why universities hand out honorary degrees. Believe it or not, Fritz, and I say this with embarrassment, I had 53 honorary degrees around the world. I think these are ceremonies. Your obligation is to go and robe up, make a speech, hopefully an inspirational speech to the graduating class, and it obviously generates publicity, if you like, or recognition for the universities. So I've been very, very lucky. I've had an extraordinary number of degrees. I've also been chancellor of 2 universities. So I've actually given out honorary degrees. Probably I've given out more than I've actually received, which is always nice, to give more than you receive. So yeah, the whole issue of education, it's a fascinating one because I was a shockingly bad student. My school career ended when I was 16 and I was lamentable.
That's actually the point I wanted to go to start that here, because if I look at your LinkedIn profile, then I only see evening classes and grammar school.
That's exactly right. I left school. I hated school, to tell the truth. I fled the first opportunity I could when I was 16. Went to work. I realized kind of what I'd done that was a bit dangerous. So I took myself off to evening classes, and I discovered that, quite contrary to what I'd been told at school, I was a natural learner. I really loved learning. It's just that I loved learning things that interested me, not having things shoved into my brain that honestly didn't interest me, where I couldn't make connections. I think I'm good at making connections, but it was when I was allowed to make those connections, create my own curriculum, as it were, invest my time in subjects that I really was fascinated by, and look for the crossovers in those subjects, that I think I became a natural born learner. I now teach. I've been teaching full time pretty well for the last 14 years.
Okay, so to what extent is then all these honorary degrees, the fact that you are a teacher, is that a vindication of the school system you were forced to be part of?
It's vindication or revenge. Depends on how nice a guy you are.
Oh, let's go with vindication at least.
Okay.
Yeah, that's better. Okay, so and you grew up in Ireland.
I know. I grew up in London, in North London. I'm a war child. I mean, I think that's quite significant. I'm a Blitz baby. There are not that many of us. There were children born in a 6-month period during the Blitz. And I think that as my first 3-4 years of my life were spent in one version or another of a bomb shelter, I'm convinced that had an impact on me. Now, what I've discovered since is that basically those early years, which are traumatic, can have one or two effects. It can either really traumatize you and have a deleterious effect, or actually it can be like an inoculation from fear. And I think that by God's good grace, I think I actually got the second. I think it sort of inoculated me against fear. I've never been fearful. That's in terms of the way I've pursued career or the things I've done, everything else. And I genuinely believe there's a connection. And
Yeah.
I've been reading quite a lot about that recently. This is a new science, but it's a science that seems to have taken off, of this notion that trauma can have two different effects.
Yeah. No, I immediately get it in the sense that if you experience such severe trauma as the Blitz, nothing after that should scare you because you've seen actually the worst there is. So who cares? So
Yep.
yeah, makes sense. Absolutely. So um, as mentioned, 30 years film, 25-year public service, 10 years education. What came first when once you
Well, what preempted all of them was advertising. I went to advertising when I left school. I became a messenger at an advertising agency, and it was it was I was a round peg in a round hole. I really liked it, and I became remarkably successful by the time I was 21. I had a fantastic job at 21. I was sent off to America when I was 23, which was unique. This is 1964. Only the Beatles had been to America. I think a lot to do with the age I was. I was very lucky, born in 1941. It was a good year to pick in some respects, certainly culturally, a very good year to pick. And and that went well. And then I had a kind of moment of truth, which was I've never smoked and I don't like smoking. My mother did, but I don't like smoking. And I was asked to handle a very big cigarette account at my ad agency. And I said I didn't really want to do that. And they quite rightly said, but you're an employee here. It's not up to you to pick and choose. I said, I'd rather leave. And I left with lots of goodwill and started my own company. In fact, the ad agency put up 2/3 of the capital for the first business I started. So I've been self-employed since I was 25.
wow, that's actually sticking to your principles.
Yeah, I think it was an important moment. And I was teaching yesterday, for it's not, I hope it's not an abstraction, but yesterday we were talking about a film I tried to make on Speer, on Albert Speer. I actually at one point owned the rights to Inside the Third Reich. And the students were asking me, well, why would you pursuing that? I said, because very early in the book, he points out he listened to a speech by Hitler the day before his 23rd birthday. And because he wanted to be an architect, he was an ambitious guy, he joined the Nazi Party. And what struck me as really important is you can make a decision that early in your life, 22 years old, that then subsequently affects the whole of the rest of your life. And the decision I made at 25 was rather than be employed and do something I was very uncomfortable doing, I went out into a business on my own. It was a great move. And that's actually what stimulated it. If those two events hadn't occurred, wouldn't have happened.
Uh, have you ever then dreamt about what if could have been another life?
Yeah, I mean, ironically, I've got a kind of doppelganger, really. The guy that took my job is a very, very successful man called Frank Lowe, who went on to run that agency and indeed other ad agencies. So in a sense, my parallel life probably would have been Frank Lowe's, who's a very nice guy, very wealthy guy, but I wouldn't want it to be him.
Yeah. Okay, I understand that. So yeah, we have to talk a little bit about you could say your film background. So advertising to film, how did that happen?
Basically, it was the 60s. It wasn't just a question of being daring. It was a cultural period in London where it was like, well, what's next? What can I do? I can do anything. You really did believe that, weirdly, rather pathetically, I guess. And I decided that it was either going to be the music industry or the film industry for me. I knew a lot of people in the music industry, but somehow it seemed to film offered more, not so much glamour, more opportunity. And I liked stories and everything else. I trusted my imagination. I'd already proved that in advertising. And I had colleagues I was working with, where I was very lucky. I mean, in my ad agency, my team were Charles Saatchi, Alan Parker, and Ridley Scott. I mean, a pretty
Yeah.
extraordinary group of people, a very competitive group of people. So I decided to have a crack at the film industry. I knew nothing. When I look back, my level of ignorance was breathtaking, but more by luck than by judgment, or maybe by determination, or maybe because I was a good juggler. I got my first film made. It was written by Alan Parker, persuaded him to leave the agency, and together, and then with Ridley, we forged careers, really supporting each other, helping each other.
Filmmaking is okay. My layman's perspective is about telling a story.
Yep.
Um, looking at, I mean, what you just described, how you grew up, looking at the type of films, at least which are listed, how personal are these films for you? Is
Very,
that your story?
very. I mean, the first film was a film called Melody. It was actually about my relationship, meeting my wife at school, and the pressures that created, and the way it broke up friendships, as well as creating a lifetime for me, a lifetime with my wife, 63 years. So film was about that. I was very lucky. Again, I had my contacts in the music industry. There was a young group called the Bee Gees who were quite ambitious at the time. And
Yeah.
I managed to work with them, and we juggled together a really nice, very nice movie, actually. They did okay. It was a huge success in the Far East. Well, I've never quite understood why, but it was. And then I started making films much more, in a sense, more personal. I did a film called That'll Be the Day, another film called Stardust. That'll Be the Day was based on a moment in my life where I was doing my homework, aged 15, and on the radio, they announced a song. And it was a song called Heartbreak Hotel by a guy called Elvis Presley. And really, my life changed. I remember sitting there thinking, you know what, sod it. There is another world out there. Because prior to that, it had been Frank Sinatra, it had been my parents' world. And suddenly I realized there was another world, a different world. And the fact that they didn't quite like that world probably made it more attractive. And so I wanted to make a film about that moment in my generation's lives. And it was a very, very successful film. It obviously hit a lot of right notes for an entire generation. I was 27 when I did that.
That's being successful early on in your
Yep.
right. And do you at the time, because you've given me a sense of, okay, being ignorant, young, throwing yourself in the deep end.
Yep.
Is that would that be generic advice you would give to young people out there? Hey, just go with it, see what works, or is that something which is also related to one's character?
I think it's combination of two things. Number one, discovering that the way I'd been misread at school certainly had an impact on me. That they had not understood what I was about, because I was remarkably successful remarkably quickly in the world of work. So how they got that wrong? I read a lot. I really did read an enormous amount, and I read very widely, and that I think also helped. And you read about the few years that Winston Churchill was a subaltern, and that he read and read and read. And actually, again, similarly, I'm not comparing myself to Churchill, but saying what he did is he created himself through his reading. I think to an extent I did, and I had ideas fizzing around in my head. There was the other thing, which was I was of a generation where the generation above me were tired. They'd been through the war. They were grey and tired, and in a sense, they were ripe for picking, if you want to put it that way. I was part of a generation that was very energetic, very ambitious, had a vision. The media, in a sense, was working for us. The technological changes were working for us, and as I said, the competition from above was exhausted. And I think that's quite an important thing. And I'm very empathetic, because my dad was part of that generation. I worship my father. They weren't up for another fight. They'd just done 6 years.
Yeah, I can relating that to stories I hear from my parents at the time. They're a little bit younger, but still, I do understand where you're coming from. So being thrown in the deep end, but I want to come back to the reading part a little bit. So a good way to educate yourself, to develop yourself, is reading. A very generic statement, so I apologize for anybody out there who disagrees, but I get a sense that reading is becoming less and less popular because it just takes way too much time, and we want everything present us on a plate, TikTok style, within a couple of seconds. I need to know what it's all about, otherwise it's taking too long.
I think it's true, but I mean, it's interesting. We're doing a podcast here, right? So a lot of people get their information through a podcast.
Yeah.
My training, almost, I need a pen and I need a book, and I'm ruthless. I mean, anyone ever happens to inherit a book I've had is in a lot of trouble, because it's highlighted, it's marked, and that's the way I remember things. And I'll jump chapters. My wife tells me off sometimes. She says, "Have you read the whole of that book?" And I say, "No, I haven't. I know exactly what I need out of that book. I've read the chapters I need, or I've read the stuff I need, or maybe just the data I need." So in that sense, I'm quite directional. So reading for me is an exercise in accumulating knowledge or understanding or facts, but I do it through the printed page. I'm a generation that I don't think I'll ever really adjust to being able to memorize everything I hear. That's the truth.
Okay. And how does it relate to the expression, a picture says more than 1,000 words, maybe a film says more than 10,000 words? So is that a very concise way to give a message across, where a book too tedious?
I think the audiovisual is a phenomenally powerful combination of or if you like, weaponry. I was doing it before doing this today with you. I was doing a keynote speech about community television, and I'm talking about attitudes and misinformation, one thing or another. And to illustrate the point, I had a rather violent image of someone racially abusing people. But then I got a clip from a movie. I don't know if you remember it. The best hotel, Maggie Smith. Okay, at the beginning of it, it's only 48 seconds. The clip. She's refusing to be treated by a black doctor, and it's so ludicrous. And of course, then she insists on seeing someone more senior, and that guy comes around the corner. He's Pakistani. And it's a wonderful way, if you like, a visual metaphor of the ludicrous thing of her position. So what I was trying to say this morning was, this guy who's being very abusive and unpleasant in this clip, the other clip, why doesn't someone ask him the question, if you have a stroke, are you going to refuse to be put in a trolley by a guy who comes from a different country from you because he doesn't want any foreigners around? You know, by all means, sign here. You know, instead of do not resuscitate, do not move me if you're not Irish. You know, this.
Yeah.
So I think that the audio visual is a brilliant weapon for demonstrating that type of stupidity.
Okay, so does that then justify that? Okay, maybe a book is, you could say, an old-fashioned tedious medium to still gain that same knowledge?
Could say that. You absolutely could say that. On the other hand, we come and sit in my living room, and I'm absolutely surrounded by books. For me, I'm sitting in my womb. That knowledge is on the walls there. It's there. It's throbbing. It's available to me. At any point, I can get up and do that, and it's available to me. It's very important to me. Now, that could be generational. I make no apology. But my womb is sitting among my books.
Okay. What's the first three titles that come to mind? So, well, these are must-read books, or at least which influence you, or which you would recommend to somebody else?
Just off the top of my head, there's a wonderful book about the film industry by William Goldman called Adventures in the Screen Trade. It's a fantastic book about the fact that nobody knows anything really in the film industry. I would also thoroughly recommend Bruce Springsteen's autobiography, particularly a podcast like this, because it's about determination and resilience, and that when you get a bit of luck, are you ready for that luck? I talk about this a lot with my students. You know, it's one thing, people do get lucky. There's no question. During your lives, you have been, I have been, but are you ready for that slice of luck when it occurs? And that comes across very vividly, I think, in the Springsteen book. And then there's a very good book called Creativity Inc. by a guy called Ed Catmull. Ed was one of the founders of Pixar, and he talks about the process of creativity, of creating a creative organization. It's a very good book.
Good. Hey, thank you for that top three recommendation. Now, you could say, tried to steer the session a little bit to, you could say, your film background, but also what I've noticed in preparation, if I look at your LinkedIn profile, you actually only you mentioned there the fact that you're now chairing an education institute at the House of Lords. Yeah. And the whole film, the 30 years of film, is not present in that profile. Is that deliberate? Is that something is there any reason for that?
I think one of the things I'm most proud of is that when I get described now, I get described as a filmmaker educator, and I like that a lot. That makes me feel good, justified. Also, I think that my filmmaking 30 years was a process and a preparation for what I now do. And I feel like I'm very confident about that. I couldn't do what I do now had I not had those 30 years, and they were preparation for what I do now. I think what I'm doing now is as important or more effective than my years as a filmmaker. And do I really believe that? It suits me to believe that.
Okay. Well, okay. So for now, it's a closed book.
Yeah. Yes. I don't talk about it very much.
So, okay, we'll skip. So, and then the public service. I mean, again, consecutive public service education in parallel.
Sort of, almost in parallel. I was asked to go to the House of Lords in 1997. I was there 24 years. I tried briefly for a year, because I was making a movie at the time, to juggle the two, and it was not going to work. Well, something had to go. And I'd been invited to join or become a part of the Department of Education in the UK, which I found fascinating. So for 5 years, I worked flat out for the Department of Education and loved it. It was wonderful. At the same time, I think, as you know, I became president of UNICEF in the UK. And that was also like a parallel set of experiences. So we were very fortunate. I was working in the Department of Education and also president of UNICEF. I, again, lucky in the House of Lords, was the committees I was asked to chair. So I chaired what was actually the world's first piece of climate legislation in 2008. I took that legislation through the House of Lords. I chaired the communications bill in 2003, which effectively stopped Rupert Murdoch owning ITV, becoming an over-dominant owner. And that legislation has continued. You still have to, there's a public interest test that I was able to create, which is still applied to media ownership. Very healthy, should be, I think should be in every country. And then I did several other quite big pieces of work, but the last one was this business on the power of digital and the whole issue of what the impact of digital technology on truth, on how we see ourselves and the information we receive. And I ended up calling it, because the wonderful thing about chairing a select committee, you can call evidence from all over the world, and I did do. And what became evident was it was a much more serious issue than any of us had imagined. So at the end, I actually called it, I was going to call it something about how serious this was. In the end, I literally referred to it as a kind of traumatic moment for us, and that it was going to require something much more transformative if we were actually going to fulfill our mission on this earth, which is to be decent human beings and decent citizens.
Okay, I'm a little bit debate. I'm going to firstly come back to something which triggered the question to me. Is that I was asked to become a member of the House of Lords, but at the time you are not a Lord. I mean, you are a life peer. So
at the time I was Sir David. I was Sir David. Under Margaret Thatcher, I got an award called the Sea Commander of the British Empire. Under John Major, I was made a knight, and Sir David. Under Tony Blair invited me to become a member of the House of Lords.
Okay, and so how does that work? Because you have to have a particular qualification to become a member of the House of Lords.
Not really.
No.
I mean, the important point is you're going to add something to the body of knowledge that is the House of Lords. At the time I went in, there was nobody really, and no one active in the film and television industries in the House of Lords.
So that was the reason they asked you. Yeah. Why did you accept? What do you think? Hey, I got a career here. Why should I distract myself? Or what was that?
I'd done 30 years, Brett. I think I'm slightly restless. The films I was producing weren't better than the films I had produced. And I thought maybe this is a good moment to retire. Interesting enough, I didn't tell anyone. I kind of treated it, I was taking some time out from the film industry. Truth is, I knew I'd gone. And it was 5 years before I actually I did quite a big lecture, during which I announced the fact that I actually left the film industry 5 years ago.
Okay, so 25 years public service, some major legislation. And now I want to come back to what you mentioned on the Democracy and Digital Technologies Committee.
Yeah.
Impact of digital technology is significant, but are you, at the end of the final conclusion, are you concerned or are you optimistic? Is it going to help society, or is it one big threat?
If I thought we were really smart people, I'd like to think I'd be optimistic. I'm 84, I'll be 84 next month. I have no faith in the attention span of people to understand the nature of the problems they're confronting and therefore to address them. I'm a total and complete climate pessimist. Total. I think we are absolutely marching towards catastrophe. And I really believe that. I don't enjoy saying that.
Okay, so a climate pessimist because of the way of the attention span?
Because in 2008, I took evidence from all over the world as to what we could have done at the time, and we're talking about doing at the time. And in fact, in the UK, we did promise absolutely to do it at the time. That legislation still exists. But here we are, it's 2008. We're all these years later, we've done almost nothing, really nothing. The last thing I did at the Lords was on this climate committee. And I said to them as I left, my last words in the Lords, Brits, were, you're wasting your time talking about 1.5%. It's gone. Start looking at how you mitigate life at 2.3, 2.4, 2.5. That's where your attention should be. And I really believe that.
Yeah, and the way I try to discuss that topic is, I have a little bit of a geography background, geology background. Is my understanding is, look, that Earth has been existent for so many years, so many millions of years, and it's going to keep on when we're long gone. So it's not about saving the planet, because the planet will be there. It's about saving ourselves.
That's exactly what I said. I've done a TED talk on this, and that's exactly what I said. Don't worry about the planet. The planet is fine. In fact, the planet might be much better off without us. We're the problem, and we are the handmaidens of our own extinction.
Well, if that's the case, so be it. Almost, I would say.
Yeah, but the problem is it's happening rather fast. I actually did think we'd get to the end of the century. I don't even necessarily believe that anymore.
That's quite pessimistic.
It's ultra pessimistic. But if you look at, actually, there was a very interesting report last week not by scientists, by actuaries, in terms of looking at the probability of what's happening. And the probability of what's happening is that by 2050, we will have reached somewhere between 2.5 and 3. Human beings can't live at 3. We can't live at 3. A few of us might be able to, under rather bizarre circumstances, but we will be talking about billions of refugees. And that necessarily means wars. That necessarily means that, let's say, half the people on this planet will not survive. Now, if people want to think that in 2050 that's an acceptable state of affairs, God bless them. I'll be long gone, so I won't be able to help them one way or the other.
Okay. Okay. Now, that's your view on climate. Okay. Now, the study was about democracy and digital technologies. I'm also asking this as one of the, let's say, co-founders of AI for Good, which is now part of the ITU, International Telecommunications Union, where we look at how AI can help reach the Sustainability Development Goals. So there is this global community optimistically believing that technology can actually help us. So it can help mitigate the risk climate change is giving us, is maybe helping us to maintain democracy.
But sorry to interrupt you, but it's the word us I'm struggling with. It's only us can help us.
Yeah.
There's not technology can't help us. We can help us if we do the right things. So the report, the subtitle report, which I agonized over, was Digital Technology and the Resurrection of Trust. Resurrection, not improvement, not resurrection. That's where this has got to. And I didn't do that out of willfully. That was a result of all the evidence I took, which was we are well past a tipping point in trust. And yesterday, the new president of the United States was sworn in. The first thing he did was withdraw from the Paris Accords. If anyone thinks that's good news or smart news, or that's a way of actually avoiding the climate catastrophe we're walking towards, they're crazy. And I mean crazy.
No comment. Even at 80, almost 84, I see you as a very passionate person. So you're not slowing down.
No, I'll go down fighting.
You go down fighting. And if people would, I probably can guess this, but if you would come across new people and you begin, so what's your current passion? What are you working on? What are you going to leave behind?
It is all directed at education. The only route out of this is education at a much, much higher level than we've ever really previously tried to engage with. We need to become, that old saying about if you don't understand the problems, you're never going to understand the solution. I think the problem is we've got to engage with the problems properly, and we're not. We're avoiding the problem. We don't like discussing the problem. I watched you just now when I'm saying what I'm saying is people are actually resistant to the truth. So when I talk about the resurrection of trust, we've got to resurrect the idea of trusting each other. There was a report last week came out that the second most trusted group of people in the planet are scientists at 89%. The bottom is politicians and journalists at 9%, 89%. How come 89% of us trust scientists and yet we're ignoring what they're telling us? If you can explain things like that to me, maybe you could tip me around to becoming a little bit more of an optimist.
Okay. Is that what Atticus Education is all about? Through education, bring back trust?
Are you familiar with the phrase metacognition?
It rings a bell, but
It's a whole process of teaching people, is getting young people to learn how they learn. If they understand their learning processes, and everyone's learning processes are somewhat different. This comes right the way back to me in school, if you like. If you understand your own learning processes, you're going to be a better learner. If you're a better learner, you might begin to engage with the truth. You might begin to sift through competing facts. You might be able to decide who you do trust on subject A and who you trust on subject B. These are all facets of education. So my entire life now is education, the whole kit and caboodle.
yeah. It's almost full circle now. So you're ending where you started off with.
Yes, yes. We're using the experience I had as a young person of being failed.
And could I also qualify this as a 21st century skill, learning how to learn?
Yes, very much so. It's an organization called Nord Anglia. It's the largest private education organization in the world now. We have 92 schools in 32 countries. And we have this drive. We also spend enormous sums of money on professional development. So trying to ensure we got the very, very best teachers. You just mentioned the opportunities that you described. Unless teachers understand those opportunities, unless teachers understand how to teach those opportunities and encourage those behavior changes, we're not going to get anywhere. So the current generation of young teachers they have a responsibility on them, which is awesome. And very interestingly, a responsibility has never existed ever in human history, because teaching has always been building on the past. You build on the experiences of previous teachers. This generation of teachers have no idea what the world that the children they're teaching is going to look like. So therefore, we're in a sense a little like blind men, but we've got to learn Braille.
Got it. A couple of questions. Now we're almost coming to the end. You already mentioned a couple of milestones in your life, growing up in the Blitz. You could say your experience with school. What do you see as like a key milestone in your life, in your career, which, okay, that has been a very impactful moment in my life?
The decision not to be an employee. The decision that if I'm going to make mistakes, there'll be my mistakes. If I'm going to have successes, there'll be my successes. Not to look sideways, looking for other people to prop me up. And I don't mean that in a kind of Trumpian way. I mean it at all. I mean that I made a decision early on that, as I say, I was going to, and where I've been unbelievably fortunate is I married a woman who believed the same thing. If I'd married someone who doubted me or who was going to question this call or that call, she always said, you know what, if you really believe it, do it. Now that's something beyond price.
Oh, by the way, this actually reminds me of my wife as well. So I like the parallel. But you mentioned, okay, it's going to be my success. Do you have a definition of success?
Yeah, how I feel about what I've just done. So when I finished the Killing Fields, I knew I'd done something special. When I finished the Chariots of Fire, I had sat in an audience. I knew I'd done something special. Local hero, almost more so. I also know when I've failed. I've had a miserable experience of sitting, having finished a film, spent a year, 2 years on it, and knowing it didn't work. But I had no one to blame but myself. I'd made the calls, and I'd made some wrong calls.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's I think part of life. That's the bumpy road we all have to follow. It's actually quite interesting that you don't qualify success as something almost tangible in the sense, okay, amount of money I earn or the amount of people I manage.
It sounds. I hope this doesn't sound like I've never had any particular interest in money, because from the age of 23, I was earning good money. I actually found earning money easy, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
Just a question of looking for opportunities and working hard. I've always worked relentlessly hard. So the actual issue of making money has never been. I mean, I've had some moments when the banks picked up the phone and said to me, "What are you doing?" But no, Patty and I live a lovely life, and it's always been about, are we happy with the life we've got? I actually think responsibilities of being a billionaire must be awesome and probably very troubling.
Mm-hmm.
You start worrying about how you're going to leave your children, your grandchildren, How many families fall out over money? A lot.
Okay, thank you for that. Now you mentioned a couple of books, which I get a lot of, you could say, knowledge from these books, and the three you mentioned and others. What are the sources of inspiration you normally seek?
I think I seek reassurance more than inspiration. That's the truth. I mean, every now and then you come across books which are very, very special. There's a book called On Tyranny that had certainly had an impact on me. Year and a half ago, Timothy Snyder, but it was a really, really good book. I read a fascinating book by a woman called Heather. Anyway, it was called How the South Won the Civil War, which was a brilliant kind of counterintuitive book explaining why American politics is the way it is as a direct result of the South apparently losing the Civil War. That what happened is they moved west. The people that lost in the South moved west, and they dominated the West. And that's what basically occurred. It's absolutely brilliant book.
Good. There's another one to add on my list at least. Now, in this half hour, David, we talked a lot about already situations which implicitly is great advice to young managers out there. Final two questions. Is there any advice you would give young people out there starting their own journey?
Yes. Join a gang. Make sure the people around you are really, really people who want you to succeed. One of the problems with being, I think, in your late teens, early 20s, is you can have people that you think are your friends, but that doesn't mean that all of them want you to be successful. There's a lot of jealousy involved, a lot of competitiveness involved. So to surround yourself with people who want you to succeed, and through your success, see themselves succeeding. So when I said earlier, and I really meant it, I'd like to think Ridley Scott is the director he is today because we knew each other very early on, and I was able to put together the resources for him to make his first film. Exactly similarly with Alan Parker, and indeed others, Roland Joffe. So I think that designing your life and your friendships around people who are going to be supportive and are going to be consistent and can stay with you. I lost Parker a couple of years ago. I will never recover from losing him. These were the pillars to an extent of my life, were friendships, people who did amazing things for me. I'll tell you the tiny little incident. It was a guy called Brian Duffy, a photographer I was very fond of indeed, who was quite radical and interesting. Patsy and I had a very ordinary middle-class little flat. We were 22, maybe 23, just got our first flat out in Elstree in the suburbs. And he and his wife came to dinner, and we had a nice dinner. And as he left, he grabbed me. I'm sorry about the language. He grabbed me. He said, "David, get the fuck out of here. You'll die here." And he was absolutely right. 2 weeks later, we were living in central London. He was absolutely right. We were dying in the suburbs. So having people who see that, kind of know it, and are prepared to be passionate enough to say, "Get the fuck out of here," that was a really important moment.
It's also a nice segue, maybe, to end this conversation. We have to get the fuck out of here. I don't want to. But I'm conscious of the time we've spent talking to each other, David. It's been my pleasure, my honor to talk a little bit about your life experience, some great lessons learned there. And again, David, thank you so much for your time being on The Brand Called You.
Thank you for listening to The Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for The Brand Called You.